This video is sponsored by Go90. Right now, Go90 has all the seasons and episodes of Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, for free to watch for anyone in the US by going to go90.com or downloading the app. In case you didn't know, our own Cersei Lannister is the star of the show and is fabulous. There's also a ton of other awesome shows on Go90, including original shows. Links are in the video description below and in the comment section, so make sure you check it out. The Basilisk Isles are named after the ferocious beasts that once dominated them. They are a long chain of islands east of Nath off the northwestern coast of Sutheros on the Summer Sea. The Maesters call these islands the festering sore of the Summer Sea due to them being inhabited by only corsairs, murderers, monsters, pirates, sellswords, slavers, and essentially the worst of humanity that come from every known land. These men are supposed to be so horrid that only those on the Isles can find men just like themselves. The pirates on these islands especially are pretty horrible. They like to prey on those trying to avoid the ruins of Valyria and the Smoking Sea, rightfully as those places are rumored to be haunted by demons and not a fun area to go through. A captain's crew may even desert a ship if forced to go through these haunted areas. As you'd guess with such a rough crowd, life on the islands is not easy by any means. Life there is brutal, nasty, and oftentimes short, with humid hot days and swarming with stinging flies, sand fleas, and bloodworms. The Maesters state the islands aren't healthy even for the animals that roam it. Because the islands and their inhabitants are such a problem when it comes to preying on others, once every generation Volantis, with the help of one or more of the free cities, send fleets to clear out the pirates. This has had some mixed results. At times, the corsairs have fled when they were warned ahead of time. Other times, hundreds have been hanged and scores of ships have been sunk, burned down, or seized. One time even ended in a captain joining the corsairs instead of taking them out. Sathos, son of Lys, who was given command of a fleet to destroy corsair strongholds, instead decided to join the pirates and then became a king of the Basilisk Isles for almost 3 decades. Regardless of how the attacks went, the corsairs would always come back after some time, popping up new towns that would then be abandoned a year or two later, left to rot and sink into the mud. The most famous of these towns was called Port Plunder, which is celebrated in story and song, and yet it cannot be pinpointed on any map. This has led to the belief that there has been at least a dozen Port Plunders on as many islands. One is destroyed, and then another is created, and so on. The same can be said for Stye, Whore's Gash, Black Pudding, and other pirate layers that the Maesters deem more vile and infamous than the last. But let's talk about each of the Basilisk Isles separately. There are 7 major isles of this chain, each one unique in its own way. First, let's talk about the Isle of Tears. This island is the largest in the chain and located off the northwestern coast of Sutheros. The island is filled with twisted, windswept rocks, rugged flint hills, steep-sided valleys, and black bogs. It also holds remnants of an ancient civilization with ancient ruins that can also be found on the Isle of Toads and Axe Isle, which I'll talk about later. And this island is probably the major one you didn't want to visit back in the day. So the old Empire of Gis, one of the oldest known nations in the world, used to control much of Essos thousands of years before the Valyria Freehold was founded. Part of their expansion was creating a city called Gorgai on the southern coast of this island. They held this territory for 2 to 4 centuries before eventually the Valyrians discovered dragons and everything changed. The Valyrians used dragons and gathered more and more power, and soon they could even contest the old Empire of Gis. Thousands of years ago, 5 great wars were fought between the two, and in the 3rd war, it spread to the Isles. The Valyrians successfully captured their city on the Isle of Tears, and to add insult to injury, decided their name wasn't cool enough and changed it to Gargossus. Now, this city under the Valyrians was not a place you'd want to visit. The Valerians decided this city would be used as a penal colony and to house the worst of the worst, rotten criminals who would live out their days in hard labor. Because they were deemed so awful and the scourge of society, the Valerians had no problem using the colony and the criminals to test new methods of torture in the flesh pits and make them victims of blood magic of the darkest kind. There's also claims of forcing slave women to mate with beasts to create twisted, half-human children. But that's probably just a legend. I hope. It continued to serve as a prison until the Doom of Valeria. After the Doom, it basically became known as the 10th Free City, even though the location was made powerful due to slaves. During the century of chaos that followed the Doom, called the Century of Blood, the city grew in power through their use of slavery as notorious as the cities of Slaver's Bay. And of course, they also used sorcery. But this all ended 77 years after the Doom of Valeria, when it said the stink finally reached the nostrils of the gods, and they could not allow it. In the city, in the immense slave pens, one day a disease broke out. It was dubbed the Red Death, for its ability to cause tons of bleeding from every opening of the body, the skin of its victims to shred like wet parchment, and to kill 9 out of every 10 men, who would die screaming. The plague quickly spread to the other isles and was devastating. It would take about 100 years before anyone dared settle the isles again after the Red Death. So now let's move on to Axe Isle. Axe Isle is the easternmost island and contains the ruins of not only the Black Fort of a Carthene pirate who was the first to raise his banner on the Isles after the Red Death, but also from an ancient civilization, or what the Maesters believe was an ancient civilization from the Dawn Age that also existed on the Isle of Tears and the Isle of Toads. And I'll talk about the proposed living descendants of this ancient civilization when I talk about the Isle of Toads, which they believe is the only place they actually still live. The Isle is well known for Nymeria, a warrior queen and princess of the Rhoynar, who visited the islands when she attempted to lead her people to safety from the Valerians who had conquered the Rhoyne with their dragons. In her attempt to flee Essos, she came to the island, but was met by corsairs that weren't so friendly. They attacked Nymeria and her 10,000 ships, and afterwards offered them the Isle of Toads, another Basilisk Isle I'll get to, on the condition they surrendered all their boats, leaving them stranded on the island, and gave each king 30 virgin girls and pretty boys each year. Nymeria obviously said no and moved along. Next isle is the Howling Mountain. The Howling Mountain is one of the islands in this chain and also had corsairs that attacked Nymeria and offered the Isle of Toads, which she refused. Not much else is known about this island. And still related to Nymeria, there is the Talon Isle, which is claw-shaped and north of the Isle of Tears. Some corsairs from this island also attacked Nymeria's people and made the same offer. Besides that, this island is fortified by corsairs in its many honeycomb caverns, and pirates gather to trade at Barter Beach, a market, to sell and ransom slaves. Though I want to point out that isn't the only place they traded slaves or ransomed them. The corsairs of the Isles would travel elsewhere to sell, such as Marine and Astapor. Such is the case with Missandei and her brothers, who are captured by slavers on their home of Nath, and then sold to Astapor. Next, there is the Isle of Flies. Not too much happened on this island, but it is located on the western end of the chain of islands. A century after that terrible plague, the Red Death, hit the islands, the Brotherhood of Bones, a brotherhood of corsairs and pirates, settled the Isle of Flies. They are currently long forgotten though. However, their settling there, as well as the Carthene gentleman settling on his own island, opened up the islands to be filled with corsairs half a century later. And as we know, since then, they have not left. Next, the Isle of Toads. This island is located northeast of the Isle of Tears. Just like on other islands, there are remnants of an ancient civilization with ruins littering its grounds. This ancient civilization may have made the Toadstone, an idol crudely carved to resemble a gigantic evil frog that stands 40 feet high and made of greasy black stone. The current inhabitants of this island, having the same described ugly fish-like faces and webbed feet and hands, are believed to be descended from this race and of the civilizations found on the Isle of Tears and Axe Island. It is believed they are what is left of the ancient culture that was most likely put to death when the Corsairs settled the islands. Lastly, Skull Island, or Skull Isle. This island is the northernmost of the islands, uninhabited currently, windswept, and just as pleasant as you'd think an island named Skull Isle would be. You see, a good number of Corsairs of the Basilisk Isles have a thing for decorating their hulls and masts of their ships with severed heads. As we know with severed heads, eventually the flesh rots off and you're in a real pickle. It's now just an unscary skull. So when the flesh rotted off the skulls, the Corsairs would replace those heads with new ones and deliver the bare skulls to this isle as an offering to whatever dark god lives there. The shores of this beautiful island are lined with skulls as well, so plan your visit now. So those are the 7 major isles, but what about in the books? Well, in the books we hear about the islands a few times, but it isn't anything major. In one book we hear a Corsair from these isles has taken the title of the Shrouded Lord, a mysterious figure that is supposed to rule the mists around the Sorrows. It is believed he claimed to be the new Shrouded Lord because he thinks the Rhoyne will offer up richer pickings than the Summer Sea. We learn in A Feast for Crows that a new Corsair king has come to power in the Basilisk Isles and has raided Tall Tree's town. In A Dance with Dragons, we learn that Daenerys acquires a turncloak who is a huge axeman from the Isles, who Daenerys accepts as she feels Meereen will soon need every sword, which she's right, but she isn't too enthused as she hates the Isles for dealing in slavery. Also in A Dance with Dragons, Barristan Selmy has a squire who is a former slave from the islands, who is black as a maester's ink, but the best natural swordsman he had seen since Jaime Lannister. Of course, we can't forget Victarion Greyjoy, brother of Euron, who sends a man in the Iron Fleet's fastest ships to sail the Corsairs' road, stop at the towns on the Isles, and get provisions through the Iron Price, or through fighting, reaving, and raiding, and so on. Victarion has him understandably avoid the rotting dead cities on the shore and instead attack the mud and blood towns that are full of slavers, escaped slaves, skinners, whores, hunters, and surprisingly, worse. Which does not end too well, and let's just show how badass the occupants of those towns are. Of all the ships he sends, only 9 come back. They got their butts handed to them by the occupants of these islands. I mean, what did they expect attacking islands filled with some of the nastiest, most evil, hardcore people ever? So those are the Basilisk Isles. An okay vacation spot if you don't mind a rough crowd. So again, thank you to Go90 for sponsoring this video, and make sure to check out the first episode of the Sarah Connor Chronicles now. Totally free anywhere in the US through the links below. Make sure you tweet or Snapchat me what you think of our Mad Queen as Sarah Connor. Ooh, and tell me what episode was your favorite. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.